So what did Jesus say? Well, that's the object of our religion says, for as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the coming of man. Those days before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage, and up to the day that Noah entered the ark. They did not know until the flood came, and that carried them away. And he says, so also will it be at the coming of the Son of Man, at the end of the age. So Jesus believed it was a historical event. So we could say that Jesus was a deluded man of the first century. But if he was, maybe he was deluded about sin and death and resurrection.
Can't see. Turn off the lights.
Can you see that?
It's kind of blurry.
I don't think the lights are on. They're not.
This is fine.
Here's the flood.
Now the
Oceans,
color.
the seafloor breaks open, jets squirt up. There's the flood.
That's the timing of it.
Yeah, very fast. And here on the seashore, you see this gigantic tsunami approaching,
That would be bad.
almost blotting out the sun, as you can see. Let's play some checkers, and out in the background, the window here, you can see the tsunami approaching. So, up until the day of the flood, they had no idea, and there they could see the tsunami in the background, so they decided to run. Now, of course, humans made it all the way to the highest ground, and turtles didn't, so you'll find turtles lower in the fossil record. And here's the ark. It was a big deal. Didn't have a rudder, but probably had a steering fin, a steering sail. Well, how about that? If you look at the cultural, worldwide, there are now documented nearly 600 flood legends in all the indigenous populations of the world. Now, that's an interesting fact, that almost every people of the world has a flood legend. And here we have some of them. Assyria-Babylon, several from Assyria-Babylon, Persia, Syria, Asia Minor, Fiji Islands, Hawaii, and they all talk about somebody who was saved, who had a boat, and their animals were saved on it, and all the rest of the world was flooded. And some of them lose elements of it, but for the most part, there was a universal destruction by water. Humans were saved. The divine destruction. There was one favored family. You find it all the time. Okay, so how can all these different peoples across the world who did not talk to each other have the same legend? That can't be explained by evolution. Was Noah's flood a local flood? Well, you've heard this one. This is the latest one, right? The theistic evolution one says that there was a local flood. It happened in the Black Sea, and that's just plain nonsense, because humans could simply have traveled to some other area. And why even build an ark when you could just move over the mountains and save the animals? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And so, that's the flood. That's the local flood legend. Okay, and so people are trying to find a reason not to believe in a flood, and so that's their belief. And everybody believes, creationists and evolutionists, that there was a supercontinent. You've heard of it called Pangea, and it broke apart and drifted into continents. The question is, how old was it? How long did that take? Was it millions of years, or was it less than a year? I mean, that's the question. Nobody disputes this. And so I'm going to talk to you about 3 flood models. Okay, we're talking about fossils, but you have to figure out how did the fossils get there. This one's called the runaway subduction model. In the runaway subduction model, what happens is that there is some event that causes a plate to scoot under another plate. And this, when it scoots under, it drags. The crust broke under extreme heat and pressure, and the fissure rapidly expanded worldwide. And the crustal plate dove under the plate next to it, and when it did, it dragged all that stuff below it, and the hot mantle, that's this part up here, vaporized huge volumes of ocean water. The supersonic steam jets from here shoot up into the air, and they also eroded the sediment, the rock at the fissure point, and the moisture condenses and falls as intense global rain, and the broken plates sink into the mantle. And you all know what the mantle is, right? That's the liquid thing below the crust. Okay. The plate motion continues until the heat stabilizes and continents form when the plates halt and the crust thickens by lateral crushing movement. So it stops, and it's just like a train. The engine stops, but the caboose doesn't. And so it's like a train wreck. And so the continents crush laterally. And when they crush laterally, they go up. Okay. And the water recedes into the trenches in the ocean beds as thickened continents rises. That's one model. Okay. Here's another model. Slightly different approach. It's a hydroplate theory. And that one is that the crust sits suspended on rock pillars, or just protrusions over subterranean water. And by the way, they drilled a lot of wells out in Siberia. They found immense bodies of seawater, salt water, 2 miles, 10 miles below the crust. Pressure builds and fissure forms worldwide in hours. The weight of the crust forms it forces an immense volume of water to shoot up. Imagine, we've got 10 miles of crust going like this on about a half a mile of water. That water is blowing up. And the supersonic jets shoot into the upper atmosphere, and the water, this water is coming out supersonically. It erodes the minerals, creating massive sediment flows. Eventually, the sediment, on both these models, the sediment the crust open up like this, and the mantle below it is under great pressure. It springs up like a spring, and it forces itself upward. It creates the mid-oceanic ridges. If you look, there's a mid-oceanic ridge all around the Earth, and the plates slide downhill until the lubricating liquid is gone, and the continents form on the leading edge of those plates, which are going about 45 miles an hour, crash into the mantle because they have no more water. Then, of course, you have the train wreck again. The back of the plate crushes into the front of the plate, and the crust thickens by lateral crushing movement, and water recedes into trenches, ocean beds as thickened continents rise. Now I have to ask you a question. Does this sound more plausible from a scientific standpoint than all these floating, over millions of years, every continent sunk for some reason and it rose again 21 times? Because that's the other story. Okay.
We can see on our planet 17 very strange features.
This is Dr. Walter
That
Brown.
can now be systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. This explanation shows us just how rapidly major mountains formed. It explains the coal and oil deposits, rapid continental drift. Bi-ocean floors have huge trenches and hundreds of canyons and volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and most of the fossil record, the so-called ice ages, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. The pre-flood Earth probably had one very large supercontinent containing lush vegetation, seas, rivers, and minor mountains. According to the hydroplate theory, the pre-flood Earth had a lot of subterranean water, about half what is now in our oceans. This water was in interconnected chambers, forming a thin spherical shell, about half a mile thick, perhaps 10 miles, below the Earth's surface. Increasing pressure in the subterranean water chamber stretched the overlying crust, just as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began with a microscopic crack, which grew in both directions at about 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure because of the weight, the 10 miles of rock pressing down on it. So the water exploded violently out of the rush. Calculations show that all along this globe-encircling crack, fountains of water jetted supersonically over 20 miles into the atmosphere. The spray from this enormous fountain produced torrential rains such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The Bible states that all the fountains of the great deep burst open on one day. And it describes these events about 4,500 years ago, which we can now tie together scientifically in cause and effect order as the hyperplate theory. The fountains of the great deep and the expanding steam produced violent winds. Some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced some massive ice lumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals. The high-pressure fountains eroded the rock on both sides of the crack, and even threw up the limy contents of many pre-flood seas. Huge volumes of sediments settled out of this muddy water all over the Earth. These sediments trapped and buried plants and animals, forming the fossil ground. The flooding uprooted vegetation, moving it to regions where it accumulated and quickly became coal and oil by processes we can duplicate in the laboratory today. Experiments show that as erosion widened the rupture, its width became so great that the compressed rock beneath the subterranean chamber sprung up, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, the hyperplates, still with lubricating water beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of about 45 miles an hour, they ran into resistances, compressed, crushed, thickened, and buckled. The portions of the hyperplates that buckled up formed mountains. Those that buckled down formed ocean trenches. This is why these features are generally parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. The hyperplates, in sliding away from the oceanic ridges, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated. Every continental basin was naturally left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes. Each lake that grew from rainfall or drainage from higher elevation spilled over its rim at the lowest point of the rim. That eroded a little notch in the rim, allowing even more water to flow through the notch faster, cutting the soft, flood-deposited sediments even deeper. This process accelerated until all the lake's water dumped through a very deep slit, forming a canyon. The largest of these was the Grand Canyon. North and east of the Grand Canyon was a huge lake that I have identified and named Grand Lake. Its dumping released more water than is in all 5 of the Great Lakes combined. Grand Lake spilled over its rim, eroded its dam, 20 miles south of Page, Arizona, catastrophically forming the Grand Canyon within a few weeks.